The panel's decision was announced on a Friday morning that would forever change how the Queen's Guard was perceived by both the military establishment and the general public. Michael Harrison would receive an official reprimand for breaking protocol, acknowledging the technical violation of his orders, but he would also be awarded a commendation for exceptional courage in protecting a civilian child from harm. The unprecedented combination of discipline and recognition reflected the complex nature of his actions and their outcomes. Colonel Morrison stood as he delivered the panel's reasoning, explaining that while military discipline required consequences for protocol violations, the exceptional circumstances and successful protection of innocent life warranted recognition of Michael's moral courage. The decision established a new precedent that individual judgment could sometimes supersede rigid adherence to rules when human safety was at immediate risk. Though such decisions would always require careful review and justification, Emma Thompson was invited to attend the ceremony where Michael received his commendation, arriving in London with her mother and wearing the same blue dress she had worn on that frightening morning outside the palace gates. Her presence served as a powerful reminder of why Michael's actions had been necessary and important, transforming an abstract discussion about military protocol into a very human story about protecting those who cannot protect themselves from unexpected danger. The ceremony took place in the same courtyard where the incident had occurred, with Michael's fellow guards forming an honor guard, while distinguished guests and media representatives witnessed the unusual dual recognition of both discipline and heroism. Emma presented Michael with a drawing she had made showing him as a knight in shining armor, protecting a princess from a dragon, her childish artwork capturing the fairy tale quality that the story had taken on in public imagination. Michael's reinstatement to active duty came with a new assignment that reflected both his proven courage and the need to manage public attention surrounding his case. He would become part of a special unit responsible for public safety and crowd management during ceremonial events, using his experience to help develop better protocols for protecting both the royal family and visiting tourists who came to witness Britain's historic traditions and pageantry. The incident led to comprehensive reviews of security procedures at all royal residences, with particular attention paid to identifying and managing individuals who might pose threats due to mental health issues. New training programs were developed to help guards and security personnel recognize early warning signs of psychological distress while maintaining the dignity and accessibility that made royal sites welcoming to millions of visitors from around the world. David Miller received treatment at a secure psychiatric facility where doctors worked to address the underlying mental health conditions that had contributed to his violent behavior. His case became part of broader discussions about improving mental health services and support systems for individuals experiencing psychological crises, with advocates arguing that better early intervention might have prevented the incident entirely while protecting both Miller and potential victims like Emma Thompson. Sarah Thompson established a scholarship fund in Michael's honor to help military families whose members had demonstrated exceptional moral courage in difficult circumstances. The fund recognized that doing the right thing sometimes came with personal and professional costs that deserved community support and recognition. Emma contributed her own savings from birthday and Christmas gifts, wanting to help other brave people who might need assistance after helping others. The story became part of the training curriculum at military academies, where future officers studied the balance between following orders and exercising moral judgment in crisis situations. Michael was invited to speak at several institutions about leadership, courage, and the responsibility that comes with wearing a uniform that represents both authority and service. His message emphasized that true discipline sometimes requires the courage to make difficult decisions based on values rather than rules. Years later, Emma Thompson would study international relations at university, inspired by her childhood encounter with someone who had risked his career to protect her. She wrote her senior thesis about the role of individual moral courage in institutional settings, using Michael's story as a case study in how personal ethics can positively influence organizational culture and public trust in government institutions and military service. Michael Harrison continued his military service with distinction, eventually rising to become a training officer responsible for teaching new guards about both the importance of protocol and the wisdom of moral judgment in exceptional circumstances. His experience that morning outside the palace gates had taught him that true honor comes not from blind obedience to rules, but from understanding the deeper purpose behind those rules and having the courage to act when those purposes are threatened. The palace gates where the incident occurred became an informal memorial to the idea that protection means more than just standing guard. Tourists who learned about Michael's story often asked their guides to point out the exact spot where a young soldier had chosen humanity over protocol, creating a new kind of attraction that celebrated moral courage alongside royal history. The iron bars that Emma had pressed against while reaching for her toy became symbols of both the barriers that separate people and the bridges that connect them through acts of compassion. Emma's toy horse, which had inadvertently saved her life by keeping her in one place long enough for Michael to reach her, was preserved in a place of honor in her childhood bedroom. As she grew older, she would sometimes hold the small plastic figure and remember the morning when a stranger had risked everything to keep her safe, reinforcing her belief that there were still heroes in the world who would step forward when others needed help most. The ripple effects of that single moment of courage continued to spread through the years, influencing military policy, inspiring public service, and reminding countless people that individual actions can make extraordinary differences in the lives of others. Michael's decision to break ranks had lasted only seconds, but its impact would endure for generations, proving that sometimes the most important duty is to follow one's conscience rather than one's orders, especially when innocent lives hang in the balance. The story became a testament to the power of split-second decisions and the responsibility that comes with the ability to help others, showing that true heroism often emerges not from grand gestures or planned actions, but from ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things when circumstances demand nothing less than their very best human instincts and moral courage in the face of danger and uncertainty. The stranger's fingers were just about to make contact with Emma's shoulder when James crashed through the crowd like a red and black thunderbolt. His perfectly polished boots pounded against the pavement as he pushed past shocked tourists, his tall ceremonial hat somehow staying perfectly in place despite his urgent movement. The crowd began to part instinctively, sensing something serious was happening but not yet understanding what. "Stay away from her," James shouted, his voice carrying the authority of years of military training. The command cut through the morning air like a sword, causing dozens of heads to turn in confusion. Emma spun around at the commotion, her bright smile fading as she saw the strange man so close behind her, and the royal guard rushing toward them with fierce determination in his eyes. The attacker's face twisted with rage and surprise. He had been planning this moment for weeks, studying the palace routines, knowing exactly when the crowds would be thickest and security would be focused on the ceremony rather than individual tourists. He never expected one of the supposedly immovable guards to break protocol and interfere with his plans. His hand, which had been reaching for Emma, quickly moved back toward his jacket where something metallic glinted in the morning sunlight. Sarah finally realized what was happening and instinctively pulled Emma behind her, her maternal instincts kicking in even though she didn't fully understand the threat. Emma's flag dropped to the ground as she clung to her mother's legs, her excitement replaced by confusion and growing fear. The little girl looked up at the approaching guard with wide eyes, not knowing whether he was coming to help them or if they were in trouble somehow. James reached the group just as the attacker's hand emerged from his jacket, revealing a small but deadly knife with a curved blade. The weapon caught the sunlight for a brief moment before the man lunged forward, no longer trying to hide his intentions. His target was still Emma, but now Sarah stood between them, her arms spread wide to protect her daughter even though she had no training or weapons to defend herself with. Without hesitation, James threw himself between the attacker and the mother and child. His red uniform jacket took the brunt of the first knife thrust, the blade tearing through the ceremonial fabric but not reaching his skin thanks to the protective vest he wore underneath. The force of the impact sent him stumbling backward, but he quickly regained his footing and grabbed the attacker's wrist before he could strike again. The crowd erupted into screams and chaos as people finally realized what was happening. Some tourists ran away in panic while others pulled out their phones to record the shocking scene. Parents grabbed their own children and backed away, creating a wide circle around the struggle. The ceremonial music stopped abruptly as the other guards became aware of the emergency situation unfolding, just yards from their positions. Emma pressed her face against her mother's coat, too frightened to look but unable to block out the sounds of the fight happening so close to her. Sarah held her daughter tightly while watching in horror as the guard wrestled with their attacker. She wanted to run, to get Emma as far away from danger as possible, but her legs felt frozen in place and she was afraid that moving might somehow make things worse. James and the attacker grappled for control of the knife, their struggle taking them dangerously close to other tourists who were trying to escape. The guard's ceremonial training had not prepared him for hand-to-hand combat, but his basic military background and his desperate desire to protect Emma gave him strength he didn't know he possessed. The attacker was taller and heavier, but James fought with the fury of someone defending the innocent. Security breach at the main gate. James managed to shout between grunts of effort as he tried to wrestle the knife away from his opponent. His call was immediately picked up by the other guards, who began radiating the alert through their communication systems. Within seconds, additional security forces would be converging on their location, but James knew that seconds might be too long if he couldn't subdue the attacker quickly. The knife changed hands twice during their struggle, each man desperately trying to gain the advantage while avoiding the deadly blade. James used his knowledge of the palace grounds to his benefit, maneuvering the fight away from Emma and Sarah and toward an area where he would have more room to operate. His red coat was now torn and dirty, his perfect appearance completely ruined, but none of that mattered to him now. Emma peeked around her mother's protective embrace and saw the guard who had been standing so perfectly still just minutes before now fighting desperately to protect her from a man she didn't understand. Even in her fear, she felt a strange sense of gratitude toward this stranger in the red uniform who had given up everything to keep her safe. She didn't understand concepts like duty or sacrifice, but she could see that he was risking himself for her. The attacker began to realize that his plan was failing catastrophically. Not only had he failed to reach his target, but he was now engaged in a public fight with a royal guard while surrounded by dozens of witnesses recording everything on their phones. His carefully planned escape route was blocked by panicking tourists, and he could hear the sound of additional security forces approaching rapidly. Desperation made him fight even more viciously, knowing this might be his only chance. James felt his strength beginning to fade as the adrenaline started to wear off, but he refused to give up. Every time he looked toward Emma's frightened face, he found new reserves of determination. This innocent child represented everything he had sworn to protect when he took his oath as a royal guard, and he would not let her down, even if it cost him his career or his life. The sound of running boots on pavement grew louder as backup security forces closed in on their position. James knew he only had to hold on for a few more moments before help arrived, but those moments stretched like hours as he continued to struggle with the determined attacker, who showed no signs of giving up his deadly mission. The backup security team arrived like a storm of black uniforms and tactical gear, their boots thundering against the palace pavement as they surrounded the scene. Armed response officers quickly established a perimeter around James and his attacker, their weapons drawn but held carefully to avoid hitting innocent bystanders who were still scrambling to safety. The lead officer, Sergeant Williams, immediately assessed the situation and began coordinating his team's response. James felt a surge of relief as he saw his fellow officers arriving, but he couldn't afford to relax his grip on the attacker even for a second. The man was still struggling wildly, trying to break free with the knife still clutched in his hand. Sweat dripped down James's face as he used every ounce of his remaining strength to keep the weapon pointed away from Emma and the other civilians who hadn't yet escaped the area. "Drop the weapon now," Sergeant Williams commanded, his voice amplified by training and authority that had ended countless dangerous situations. The attacker's eyes darted frantically between the approaching officers and his intended victim, who remained huddled behind her mother just a few feet away. His breathing was ragged and desperate, like a cornered animal looking for any possible escape route. Emma watched the scene unfold with a mixture of terror and fascination. She had never seen so many police officers in one place, and their serious faces and big weapons made her feel both safer and more frightened at the same time. Her small hand gripped her mother's coat tightly as she tried to understand why someone would want to hurt her when she had done nothing wrong to anyone. The attacker suddenly changed tactics, realizing that escape was impossible and capture was inevitable. Instead of continuing to fight James for the knife, he made one last desperate lunge toward Emma, hoping to complete his mission even if it meant certain capture. His sudden movement caught James off guard for just a moment, and the knife blade flashed dangerously close to the little girl's face. Sarah screamed and pulled Emma backward so quickly that both of them tumbled to the ground, the mother's body completely covering her daughter as they fell. The impact knocked the wind out of Sarah, but she didn't care about her own pain as long as Emma was protected. From beneath her mother's protective embrace, Emma could hear shouting and the sound of more struggling, but she couldn't see what was happening anymore. James threw himself after the attacker with renewed fury, tackling him around the waist and bringing him down hard onto the pavement, just inches from where Emma and Sarah had fallen. The knife skittered away across the ground, finally out of reach of the dangerous man who had caused so much chaos. Both men hit the ground with tremendous force, but James managed to land on top, using his weight to pin his opponent down. "Weapon is secure," one of the tactical officers called out as he kicked the knife further away from the struggle. Other officers moved in quickly to help James subdue the attacker, their training allowing them to work together smoothly, despite the chaotic circumstances. Within moments, they had the man in handcuffs, his arms secured behind his back and his threat to Emma finally neutralized. Emma peeked out from under her mother's protective embrace and saw the guard who had saved her sitting on the ground nearby, breathing heavily and looking exhausted but victorious. His perfect red uniform was now completely ruined, covered in dirt and torn in several places, but to Emma he looked like the bravest person she had ever seen. She wanted to say thank you, but her voice seemed to have disappeared along with her fear. Medical personnel arrived on scene within minutes, having been called as soon as the security breach was reported. They quickly checked Emma and Sarah for injuries, finding only minor scrapes and bruises from their fall to the ground. The little girl clung to her mother throughout the examination, still processing everything that had happened to her during what was supposed to be a fun birthday celebration. James was also examined by the medical team, who found several minor cuts and bruises but nothing serious enough to require immediate hospital treatment. His protective vest had done its job perfectly, preventing the attacker's knife from causing any real damage during their struggle. However, the medics were more concerned about the psychological impact of what he had experienced than his physical injuries. Sergeant Williams approached James as the medical team finished their examination. His expression was serious but not angry, which surprised James, who had expected immediate consequences for breaking protocol during a formal ceremony. Instead, the sergeant seemed genuinely concerned about his welfare and wanted to understand exactly what had motivated him to take such unprecedented action. "Can you walk me through what you observed before you left your post?" Sergeant Williams asked, his tone professional but respectful. James straightened his shoulders despite his exhaustion and began to recount everything he had noticed about the attacker's suspicious behavior, from his nervous movements to his inappropriate clothing for the weather, to the way he had positioned himself directly behind Emma. As James spoke, other officers were interviewing witnesses and reviewing security camera footage that had captured the entire incident from multiple angles. The evidence was already painting a clear picture of a planned attack that had been prevented only by James's quick thinking and willingness to sacrifice his career to protect an innocent child. The attacker's identity was still unknown, but investigators were working to uncover his motives and determine whether he had been working alone. Emma finally found her voice as the immediate danger passed and the chaos around them began to settle. She tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed toward James, who was still sitting on the ground being questioned by his superior officer. "Mommy," she whispered, "I want to thank the nice guardman who helped us." Her simple request brought tears to Sarah's eyes as she realized how close they had come to disaster and how much they owed to this brave stranger. The crowd of tourists who had witnessed the attack began to disperse slowly, many of them still shaken by what they had seen. Some approached the police officers to offer their phone recordings as evidence, while others simply wanted to make sure that Emma and her family were safe. The incident had transformed what should have been a pleasant tourist attraction into something much more serious and frightening. News reporters began arriving at the scene, having been alerted by the heavy police response and the dozens of social media posts from witnesses who had shared their videos online. The story of a royal guard breaking centuries of protocol to save a little girl was already spreading across the internet, capturing the attention of people around the world who were moved by James's heroic actions. News vans lined the street outside the palace within an hour of the incident, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical flowers seeking sunlight. Reporters from major networks around the world had picked up the story through social media, and the dramatic footage captured by tourists was already being broadcast to millions of viewers. The headline, "Royal Guard Breaks Protocol to Save Child," was trending on every social platform, making James an instant international hero. Inside the palace security office, James sat across from Commander Harrison, the head of Royal Guard operations. The room was formal and intimidating, with portraits of past commanders watching from the walls and ceremonial weapons displayed in glass cases. James kept his back straight despite his exhaustion, knowing that his entire career was about to be decided in this conversation. Commander Harrison studied the preliminary incident reports spread across his desk, occasionally glancing up at James with an expression that was impossible to read. The silence stretched uncomfortably as the commander reviewed witness statements, security footage, and James's own detailed account of the events. James had expected immediate discipline, but instead he was facing this thorough investigation of his actions. "In 30 years of service, I have never seen a guard break formation during a ceremony," Commander Harrison finally said, his voice measured and careful. "The protocols exist for very important reasons, Guard Morrison. They maintain the dignity of the crown, ensure public safety, and preserve traditions that date back centuries. What you did today violated every principle we hold sacred." James felt his heart sink, knowing his career was over. Meanwhile, Emma sat in a comfortable waiting room with her mother, both of them wrapped in blankets provided by victim services officers. A kind policewoman named Officer Janet had been assigned to take care of them, while investigators completed their work. Emma kept asking when she could see the Red Guardman to say thank you, not understanding the complicated adult world of rules and consequences that James was now facing. Sarah held her daughter close, still trembling slightly from the shock of what had almost happened. She couldn't stop thinking about how different this day could have ended if James hadn't acted when he did. The attack had happened so quickly that she barely had time to react, and without his intervention, she knew she would have been powerless to protect Emma from someone so determined to cause harm. Officer Janet explained to Emma and Sarah that they would need to give formal statements about what they had witnessed, but she tried to keep the process simple and non-threatening for the little girl. Emma's statement was brief and innocent, focusing mainly on how brave the guard had been and how grateful she felt toward him. She didn't fully understand the violence that had been intended against her, which was probably for the best. Back in the commander's office, James prepared himself for the worst as Commander Harrison closed the case files and looked directly at him. "However," the commander continued, "I have also never seen such clear evidence of an imminent threat to civilian life. The security footage shows that man reaching for a weapon with clear intent to harm that child. Your assessment of the situation appears to have been absolutely correct." The commander stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace courtyard where the incident had occurred. Maintenance crews were already cleaning up the area and preparing for normal operations to resume, but the memory of what had happened there would linger for a long time. "The question now is whether we can justify breaking protocol when the threat was real and immediate," he said thoughtfully. James remained silent, knowing that anything he said might make his situation worse. He had acted on pure instinct in that moment, driven by his desire to protect an innocent child, rather than by any careful consideration of rules or consequences. If he could go back and do it again, he knew he would make exactly the same choice, regardless of what it cost him professionally. The preliminary investigation results were beginning to paint a clearer picture of the attacker and his motives. Detective Inspector Brooks knocked on the commander's door and entered with a folder full of new information about the man James had subdued. His name was Marcus Thompson, a 34-year-old with a history of mental illness and previous threats against public figures and institutions. Thompson had been planning this attack for months, Detective Brooks reported to both men. "We found detailed maps of the palace grounds in his apartment, along with schedules of guard ceremonies and photographs of previous events. He had specifically targeted this morning because he knew the crowds would be largest and security would be focused on the ceremony rather than individual visitors. The news that the attack had been carefully planned rather than a random act of violence made James's decision to act seem even more justified. Thompson had not been a confused tourist or someone having a mental health episode. He was a determined individual who had spent considerable time preparing to harm innocent people, with Emma apparently selected as his target for reasons that were still being investigated. Commander Harrison absorbed this new information carefully, knowing it would influence his decision about James's future. The fact that a trained guard had recognized the threat before anyone else and acted to prevent it spoke well of James's instincts and training. The broken protocol was serious, but saving a child's life was more serious still. Emma's energy was returning as the shock of the morning wore off, and she began asking Officer Janet more questions about the palace and the guards. She wanted to know if all guards were as brave as James, whether they had special training to fight bad people, and most importantly, whether she could visit him to say thank you properly. Her innocent questions made the adult smile despite the serious circumstances. Social media was exploding with support for James's actions, with thousands of people posting messages praising his heroism and calling for him to be recognized rather than punished. Videos of the incident had been viewed millions of times, and public opinion was overwhelmingly in favor of the guard who had chosen to protect a child rather than follow rules. Several celebrity figures had already posted messages supporting James and calling for the royal guard to honor rather than discipline him. The Palace press office was being flooded with calls from reporters, wanting official statements about the incident and James's status. The public relations implications of the situation were complex. While they couldn't encourage guards to break protocol, they also couldn't be seen as punishing someone who had saved a child from a dangerous attacker. The royal family themselves were being briefed on the situation and would need to make decisions about how to respond publicly. Detective Brooks continued his briefing, with more disturbing details about Thompson's background and intentions. He had written extensively about his plans in a journal we found in his apartment. Emma appears to have been chosen specifically because she was small and vulnerable, and he believed that attacking a child would generate more media attention for his cause. He wanted to make a statement against what he called royal privilege by harming an innocent tourist. This revelation made everyone in the room realize how close they had come to a true tragedy, and how James's split-second decision had prevented not just physical harm to Emma, but also a devastating blow to the palace's reputation and the public's sense of safety. The guards' actions had prevented a carefully planned attack that could have had consequences far beyond one family's vacation. The royal family's private secretary, Lord Pemberton, arrived at the palace security office with unprecedented speed, having been briefed on the situation during his journey from Windsor Castle. His presence signaled that the incident had reached the highest levels of royal attention, and that decisions about James's future would likely involve considerations far beyond normal military discipline. The secretary's arrival changed the entire atmosphere in the room, making everyone more formal and cautious. Lord Pemberton reviewed the case files with the careful attention of someone who understood both the legal implications and the public relations aspects of the situation. He had spent decades managing sensitive situations for the royal family, but this was unlike anything he had encountered before. The combination of a genuine hero's actions, broken protocol, and massive public support created a complex puzzle that required delicate handling. The royal family has been following this situation closely, Lord Pemberton announced to Commander Harrison and the assembled officers. Her Majesty is particularly concerned about the welfare of the child and her family, and she has expressed her gratitude that Guard Morrison acted when he did. However, we must also consider the implications for royal protocol and security procedures going forward. Emma had finally been allowed to see James, though their meeting was carefully supervised and limited to just a few minutes. The little girl ran up to him without any fear, her earlier trauma seemingly forgotten in her excitement to meet her hero. She had drawn a picture for him during her wait, a crayon drawing of a red uniformed figure standing protectively in front of a small girl, with the words, "Thank you," written in her careful child's handwriting. James knelt down to Emma's eye level to accept her drawing, and for the first time since the incident began, his formal composure cracked slightly. The simple gesture of gratitude from this innocent child meant more to him than any medal or commendation could. "You're very welcome, Emma," he said softly. "I'm just glad you're safe." His voice carried the emotion of someone who had faced the possibility of losing everything to do what he believed was right. Sarah stood nearby, watching the interaction between her daughter and the man who had saved her life. She had prepared a speech thanking James for his courage, but when the moment came, words seemed inadequate. "How do you thank someone for risking their career and possibly their life to protect your child?" She settled for a simple thank you that carried the weight of a mother's infinite gratitude. The media circus outside the palace continued to grow as more news outlets picked up the story. International reporters had joined the local press, recognizing that this story had global appeal. The image of a ceremonial guard breaking centuries of tradition to protect a child resonated with people across cultures and nationalities. Public opinion polls conducted by news organizations showed overwhelming support for James's actions, with over 90% of respondents saying he should be praised rather than punished. Commander Harrison found himself in an unprecedented position, balancing military discipline with public expectation and royal guidance. He had consulted with military lawyers, royal advisors, and senior officers, but ultimately the decision about James's future would rest with him. The pressure was enormous, knowing that his choice would be scrutinized by millions of people and could set precedents for future situations. Detective Brooks provided his final briefing on Marcus Thompson, the attacker who was now in custody awaiting formal charges. Thompson has a history of targeting symbolic figures and locations, he explained. His journal reveals a pattern of escalating fantasies about violence against representatives of authority. Emma wasn't chosen randomly. She represented innocence associated with the royal institution, and harming her would have fulfilled his desire to strike at what he saw as symbols of oppression. The psychological evaluation of Thompson painted a picture of a deeply disturbed individual who had become fixated on the royal family as a symbol of everything he felt was wrong with society. His attack on Emma had been planned as the first in a series of violent acts designed to terrorize the public and draw attention to his twisted ideology. James's intervention had likely prevented not just one tragedy, but potentially many more. Lord Pemberton had been in communication with Buckingham Palace throughout the day, and he finally received the guidance he had been waiting for. Her Majesty has made her wishes clear, he announced to the assembled group. While the royal family deeply respects the traditions and protocols that govern the royal guard, they recognize that exceptional circumstances sometimes require exceptional responses. Guard Morrison's actions demonstrated the highest ideals of service and protection. The news that the royal family supported James's actions sent ripples of relief through everyone involved in the decision-making process. However, Lord Pemberton was quick to clarify that this support came with important conditions and considerations for the future. The palace could not simply ignore protocol violations, even heroic ones, without risking the breakdown of important security procedures. Emma's simple drawing had been photographed by palace staff and was already being shared widely on social media, adding another layer of public support for James. The image of a child's innocent gratitude expressed through crayon artwork became a powerful symbol that transcended political and cultural boundaries. Messages of support were pouring in from around the world, with many people sharing their own stories of times when someone had broken rules to help them. James was finally allowed to return to his quarters to rest and clean up, though he remained under administrative review pending final decisions about his status. He looked at Emma's drawing as he sat alone in his room, still processing everything that had happened. In the space of a few hours, he had gone from anonymous ceremonial guard to international hero, but he still wasn't sure what the ultimate consequences would be for his career. The palace chaplain, Father Michael, visited James in his quarters to provide spiritual support during this difficult time. As someone who had served the royal family for many years, Father Michael understood the weight of responsibility that came with the position and the difficulty of making split-second decisions under pressure. He assured James that his actions reflected the highest moral principles, regardless of what administrative consequences might follow. Sarah and Emma were preparing to return to their hotel, their London vacation permanently changed by the morning's events. Emma kept talking about the nice guardman and asking when she could see him again, not understanding the adult complications that might prevent future meetings. Her innocence and resilience in the face of danger impressed everyone who met her, and her gratitude toward James remained pure and uncomplicated. The evening news broadcast led with the story, featuring interviews with witnesses, security experts, and royal commentators who debated the implications of James's actions. The consensus among experts was that while protocol violations were serious matters, the circumstances clearly justified his decision to act. Several former military officers appeared on television to support James, arguing that good soldiers must sometimes choose between following orders and doing what is morally right. As night fell over London, James looked out his window at the palace grounds where everything had happened. Tomorrow would bring formal hearings and official decisions about his future. But tonight he felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that Emma was safe with her mother, probably telling her father on the phone about her adventure with the brave royal guard who had protected her from danger. The formal disciplinary hearing took place the following morning in the palace's oak-paneled ceremonial chamber, a room that had witnessed centuries of royal decisions and military proceedings. James entered wearing his dress uniform, perfectly pressed and spotless, a stark contrast to the torn and dirty clothes he had worn during yesterday's incident. His bearing remained proud and military straight, despite the uncertainty about his future that weighed heavily on his mind. The panel consisted of Commander Harrison, Lord Pemberton representing the royal household, Colonel Matthews from military headquarters, and Sir Richard Ainsworth, a retired judge who specialized in military law. Each man brought different perspectives to the unprecedented case, and their decision would establish important precedents for future situations where duty to protocol conflicted with moral imperatives. James's military record was read aloud, revealing 3 years of exemplary service with commendations for dedication, reliability, and attention to detail. His superiors had consistently rated him as one of their most dependable guards, someone who took his responsibilities seriously and had never before shown any inclination to break rules or challenge authority. This made his decision to abandon his post even more remarkable and difficult to categorize. Outside the hearing room, media attention continued to intensify as more details about the case became public. Emma and her family had returned home to Yorkshire, but their story was being covered by news outlets around the world. The little girl had become an unwitting symbol of innocence protected by courage, and her childish drawing for James had been reproduced in newspapers and websites across multiple continents. The prosecution, if it could be called that, was presented by a military attorney who emphasized the importance of maintaining discipline and protocol in the Royal Guard. He argued that allowing guards to break formation, regardless of circumstances, would set a dangerous precedent that could compromise security and undermine the ceremonial dignity that was central to the Guard's mission. His presentation was thorough but seemed to lack conviction, as if he understood the necessity of his arguments without fully believing in them. James's defense attorney, provided by the military, took a different approach entirely. He focused on James's training, his oath to protect the public, and the immediate nature of the threat he had perceived. Guard Morrison didn't break protocol lightly, the attorney argued passionately. He made a split-second decision based on his assessment that a child's life was in immediate danger. His actions prevented what could have been a national tragedy. The hearing was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected witness. Detective Inspector Brooks entered with new evidence that had been uncovered during Thompson's interrogation. The attacker had finally provided a full confession, revealing details about his planning that made James's intervention seem even more crucial. Thompson had specifically studied guard routines to identify moments when security attention would be divided, and he had chosen Emma as his target precisely because he believed a royal guard would not break protocol to help a civilian child. Thompson expected the guards to remain at their posts regardless of what he did, Detective Brooks testified. His entire plan was based on the assumption that ceremonial duties would take precedence over civilian protection. Guard Morrison's decision to act destroyed the foundation of Thompson's strategy and likely saved multiple lives. As we now know, Thompson planned additional attacks if this one succeeded. James listened to this testimony with growing understanding of how his instincts had been more accurate than he had realized. His decision to trust his gut feeling about Thompson's suspicious behavior had been validated by the investigation's findings. The man had indeed been planning exactly what James had feared, and the threat to Emma had been immediate and real. Lord Pemberton spoke on behalf of the royal family, delivering a statement that had clearly been carefully crafted at the highest levels. The royal family recognizes that Guard Morrison faced an impossible choice between competing duties, he said formally. His oath required him to maintain his post and follow protocol, but it also required him to protect the innocent. In choosing to prioritize the protection of a child, he demonstrated the highest values of service that the Crown seeks to embody. The panel deliberated for nearly 2 hours, while James waited in an adjacent room, his fate being decided by people who had never faced the split-second choice he had confronted. He thought about Emma, probably back in her school in Yorkshire by now, telling her classmates about her London adventure. Her innocent gratitude had made all the uncertainty worthwhile, regardless of what punishment he might face. When the panel reconvened, Commander Harrison stood to deliver their decision. The room was completely silent as he began to speak, his words carefully measured and formal. "Guard Morrison, your actions yesterday violated centuries of protocol and tradition. You abandoned your assigned post during a formal ceremony, creating confusion and potentially compromising security procedures that exist for important reasons." James felt his heart sink. Preparing himself for dismissal from the service he loved, he maintained his military posture despite the disappointment that was building inside him. His career in the Royal Guard had been everything to him, and losing it would mean starting over completely in civilian life. However, Commander Harrison continued, "The panel finds that your violation of protocol was justified by the extraordinary circumstances you faced. Your assessment of the threat was accurate, your response was proportionate, and your actions prevented serious harm to an innocent child. The Crown does not punish those who risk everything to protect the vulnerable." The relief that flooded through James was almost overwhelming, but he maintained his composure as Commander Harrison delivered the panel's full decision. There would be a formal reprimand in his file acknowledging the protocol violation, but it would be accompanied by a commendation for exceptional service under extraordinary circumstances. He would return to duty immediately, though he would also undergo additional training and threat assessment to help other guards learn from his experience. Outside the palace, news of the decision was met with celebration by the crowds of supporters who had gathered, despite the cold London morning. Emma's story had touched people around the world, and James had become a symbol of moral courage triumphing over bureaucratic rigidity. Social media exploded with congratulatory messages and praise for the panel's wisdom in recognizing the difference between reckless rule-breaking and heroic action. The palace announced that James would receive the Royal Victorian Medal, a personal gift from the monarch recognizing distinguished service. More importantly to James, he learned that Emma and her family had been invited to return to London as guests of the Crown. With a private tour of the palace and a formal meeting with the guard who had protected her father, Michael visited James again that evening to congratulate him and discuss the spiritual dimensions of his experience. "You faced a test of character when it mattered most," the chaplain told him. "The decision to risk everything for a child you didn't know revealed the kind of person you truly are. That's a gift that can't be taught or trained. It comes from the heart." James spent the evening writing a letter to Emma, thanking her for her drawing and telling her how much her gratitude had meant to him during the difficult day that followed their encounter. He wanted her to know that heroes weren't special people, but ordinary people who chose to do the right thing when it mattered most. Her innocence and trust had reminded him why his oath of service was worth any personal cost. 3 weeks later, Emma returned to London with her parents for the promised palace visit. Her excitement barely contained as their taxi approached the familiar gates where everything had happened. She wore her best dress and carried a new drawing she had made for James, this one showing both of them smiling together under a bright yellow sun. The original crayon artwork had become famous around the world, but this new picture was just for her friend, the brave guard who had kept her safe. The private tour began in the palace's grand entrance hall, where Emma's eyes widened at the magnificent chandeliers and painted ceilings that stretched high above her head. Sarah watched her daughters wonder with mixed emotions, remembering how different this visit might have been if James hadn't acted when he did. The attack seemed like something from another lifetime now, but the gratitude remained fresh and overwhelming. James waited for them in the palace's private reception room, wearing his formal dress uniform with the newly awarded Royal Victorian Medal prominently displayed on his chest. He had been nervous about seeing Emma again, wondering if the trauma of their first meeting might have changed how she felt about him. His concerns disappeared the moment she ran into the room and threw her arms around his waist in an enthusiastic hug. "I made you another picture," Emma announced proudly, pulling her new artwork from her mother's handbag and presenting it to James with a ceremonial flourish that made everyone in the room smile. The drawing showed remarkable improvement in her artistic skills over the past 3 weeks, but, more importantly, it captured the joy and friendship that had grown from their frightening first encounter. The formal presentation of James's medal took place in the throne room, with Commander Harrison and Lord Pemberton in attendance, along with several other palace officials. Emma was given the honor of standing beside James during the ceremony, her presence serving as a living reminder of why his actions had been so important. The medal itself was beautiful, but James knew the real reward was seeing Emma safe and happy. After the ceremony, James was granted permission to show Emma and her family parts of the palace that weren't normally open to the public. They visited the guard quarters where he lived, the training facilities where guards practiced their ceremonial movements, and the armory where centuries of royal protection equipment were displayed. Emma was fascinated by everything, asking countless questions and touching whatever she was allowed to touch. The highlight of the visit was Emma's opportunity to stand at James's ceremonial post and pretend to be a royal guard herself. She stood perfectly still for almost 30 seconds before dissolving into giggles, amazed that anyone could remain motionless for hours at a time. James explained that it took lots of practice and that the most important part wasn't standing still, but staying alert to protect the people who came to visit the palace. During lunch in the palace's private dining room, Emma told James about how famous he had become in her village. Her school had invited her to give a presentation about her London adventure, and she had become something of a celebrity among her classmates. She didn't fully understand why adults found her story so interesting, but she enjoyed the attention and was proud to be friends with someone so important. Sarah finally had the opportunity to express her gratitude properly in a private moment with James. She had written him letters that she never sent, tried to find words adequate to thank someone who had saved her child's life, but everything seemed insufficient. In the end, she simply told him that Emma talked about him every day, and that he would always be part of their family's story. A guardian angel who had appeared exactly when they needed him most. The media attention had largely moved on to other stories by this time, but James's actions had created lasting changes within the Royal Guard organization. New training protocols had been developed to help guards recognize and respond to genuine threats while maintaining their ceremonial duties. James had been asked to help design these programs, sharing his experience to help other guards trust their instincts in similar situations. Emma's visit concluded with afternoon tea in the palace gardens, where she and James sat together on a bench overlooking the grounds where their first meeting had taken place. The area looked peaceful now, with tourists strolling casually and children playing nearby. No trace of the violence that had once threatened to shatter this tranquil scene. "Are you still scared sometimes?" Emma asked James with the direct honesty that only children possess. He considered her question carefully, knowing that his answer might influence how she processed her own experience of the attack. "Sometimes I am scared," he admitted. "But being scared isn't bad if it helps you pay attention and take care of people who need help." As the afternoon ended, and Emma prepared to return home to Yorkshire, she made James promise to write her letters and tell her about his adventures as a royal guard. She wanted to know about all the interesting visitors he met and whether anyone else ever needed his help the way she had. Her continued fascination with his work showed that the trauma hadn't destroyed her curiosity about the world, which relieved both James and her parents. The goodbye was emotional for everyone involved, but it was also hopeful rather than sad. Emma had grown from a frightened victim into a confident little girl who understood that there were good people in the world willing to help when help was needed. James had evolved from a rule-following guard into someone who understood that true service sometimes meant choosing between competing loyalties and trusting your heart to guide you toward the right decision. 6 months later, James received a letter from Emma's teacher along with a school newspaper that featured Emma's essay about heroes. She had written that heroes weren't people with superpowers or special abilities, but ordinary people who chose to help others even when it was difficult or dangerous. Her simple wisdom, born from their shared experience, captured the essence of what had happened that day outside the palace gates. James kept Emma's essay in his uniform pocket during ceremonial duties, a reminder that his oath of service was about more than tradition and protocol. It was about being ready to act when action was needed, about protecting innocence wherever he found it, and about understanding that sometimes the most important rules were the ones written in the heart, rather than in official manuals. Emma had taught him that being a true guardian meant being willing to risk everything for those who couldn't protect themselves, and that lesson would guide him for the rest of his career in service to the crown.